Hello everybody, my name is Magnetico and welcome to my series of videos where we take video game systems, we clean them up, repair them if need be, and sometimes we mod them. And today we're going to be taking a look at a system that actually I don't really have a lot of experience with. I didn't own it as a kid, and I may have played it a few times through a friend. I knew my cousin owned it, but we kind of moved on from it to play PlayStation 2 instead. So that kind of gave you a clue of what system we're kind of working on. It is a system that came out in 1999 from Sega. It is the Sega Dreamcast. Now, this particular system I found a long time ago. It's just been a long time since I've been able to finally get to this video, but it wasn't in rough shape, but it was pretty dirty. But other than that, the system worked fine. I already tested a few games on this, like Marvel vs. Capcom, Marvel vs. Capcom 2, Street Fighter 3, Shenmue, and so many others that it actually delayed this video because I was having so much fun playing them. I do like this system. I do like the fact that it has arcade perfect ports on it, so it is a shame that it didn't do as well as it did out in the market. Well, we're going to give this Dreamcast the love that it deserves. We're going to go ahead and open it up and clean it up for this video. And for the roadmap for future videos we're going to mod it, and then we're also going to do the finishing touches the way we always do. So thank you so much for joining me. If this is your kind of thing where somebody goes through and cleans up system, repairs them if need be, and sometimes mods them, make sure you hit the subscribe button. That way you're notified every time I post a video. Let's go ahead and clean this guy up. You're going to need your Dreamcast, a tool set so you can open it up. I'll link all these items in the description below. You're gonna need some thermal pads, 1mm and 1.5mm, some isopropyl alcohol, I use 99%, and Q-tips and some kind of brush. So with the system in hand, first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and flip this guy over. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'll go ahead and remove the broadband adapter from the Dreamcast. So once we snap that off, we're going to go ahead and put it aside. Next, we're going to use our tool so we can go ahead and open up the system. There should be 4 screws at the bottom, and this is actually the first time I've experienced any kind of issues with this particular tool set. If you have a long, skinny Phillips screwdriver, I actually recommend that over this one, because that one in the top corner there on the top right is actually really deep in there, and my tool was not able to get it. I had to use a different kind of screwdriver. So there's that screw there that was giving me a little bit of trouble. Once you remove all screws, you can go ahead and lift the lid easily, as you can see here. So we're going to put the top shell to the side, and we're going to start working on the bottom part. We're going to disconnect the power supply, and there should be 2 screws holding the power supply together. So we're going to remove one here and the other one here as well. Once those are lifted, we can go ahead and gently lift the power supply. It is held by 6 pins, so we can go ahead and just snap those off, and here it is. So we're going to put this to the side now. A protection screen was there, as I made out of plastic. We're going to go ahead and take that off as well. Finally, to complete the power supply section, we're going to remove these 2 screws here, and this is the power on and off switch. This is all one big unit here, so let's go ahead and put this to the side as well. There are 3 screws holding the laser disc structure together. After we remove all 3, it is pretty easy to pick up here. I am pretty gentle with it, but you don't have to be as gentle as I am. It's the first time it's ever been removed, so it was kind of like stuck there. But overall, it wasn't too hard. And this thing is beautiful. It's so shiny. I don't think anybody's ever opened this system, to be honest with you. But it is a little bit dusty, so we'll work on that a little bit later. There are some tiny screws on each side of the fan here. I did use that tiny screw that I used to help me out with that top right screw that was giving me issues. Then I'll use the magnet on my regular screwdriver to pick those up. Keep in mind, the fan is connected by a wire into the controller port section here. So go ahead and gently pull that apart. And finally, we have the fan, so we can work on that later and clean it up. It is very dusty as well. Next, I'm going to show you 4 screws that we're going to remove that hold the controller port section together and the battery as well. So we're going to remove those 4 screws there. Once you remove the 4 screws, this particular unit is easy to take off. It is held by a ribbon, so be gentle with it. And once we pull the ribbon, we can go ahead and put that aside so we can clean it up a little bit later. There are 7 screws holding the metal shielding together. So go ahead and remove those 7. Put them aside. I do have an order of where I'm putting all the screws as well, so just keep that in mind. Be mindful of where you put the screws. But once you remove the 7 screws, it should be pretty easy to remove the rest of the components for this system. So I want to pick up the motherboard and the metal shielding. And look at this. Might need a little bit of cleaning, but other than that, this board looks great. And as you can see, the metal shielding at the bottom does have some thermal pads there. Those are the 1mm ones we'll be using. We're going to take off this piece of plastic for the controller ports. We're going to go ahead and get this metal shielding out of the way as well. Doesn't look too bad. It looks very shiny. Even this plastic down here looks great. So I'm pretty excited about this. This system is, even though it's kind of dirty, it is actually in very good shape on the inside. We're going to go ahead and take off the top metal shielding from the motherboard. Put that aside. And this should give us the entire motherboard. Oh, this is so cool. I've never seen any of this, but just touching the thermal pad there, it's still kind of mushy, so it's still good, but I'm still going to replace it just, you know, for the sake of this video. With the top shell here, there's going to be 1 screw on the top right there to remove this piece of plastic. And there should be 2 screws on the left side here on this black little piece of plastic here. I am holding it down slightly because it does have a spring to it. So you got to be careful with that. Make sure you hold it down. Otherwise, it might fling across the room. But we're going to take off this right piece of plastic here. And this one is held by a spring, so it is kind of attached to the door. So I kind of had to like wiggle it out of place here, but finally I was able to remove it. Next up, we're going to remove this spring from the open door button here. It's not too bad. It's a small spring. Just be careful with it. Make sure you don't misplace it. It is very small. But this eject button here, or open door button here, is held by 2 screws. And they both have a little washer on each side, so those are pretty unique. So I'll definitely remember where those go. But once you remove those, you're able to remove this piece of plastic here. 2 more screws hold this clear piece of plastic for the light that tells you that the Dreamcast is on or off. Once you remove those pieces, we can go ahead and lift this up pretty easily. If I pick up the shell, the door should just fall right off, as you can see here. So definitely need some cleaning, but other than that, I love how clean this system is. There's 2 little latches on each side. Press those in, and then you can go ahead and use your screwdriver so you can push the buttons all the way out. This one was giving me a little bit of issue here. As you can see, I was kind of pressing a little bit too hard. After some time, I was able to remove the power button. As you can see, these buttons are absolutely grimy, and so is the underside of them. The last part of the disassembly is going to be the broadband adapter. It should be held together by 2 screws, which we're going to remove. Once you remove the 2 screws, it is kind of finicky to remove the metal shielding from the actual plastic, but as you can see, just a little wiggling around and I was able to remove it no problem. The actual metal shielding is actually more difficult. It's kind of hard to kind of remove, but once you figure it out, it's not too bad. It's up to you if you want to clean this or not, considering how clean this is, and it's actually protected by the metal shielding and a piece of plastic. As you can see, this one is absolutely pristine. So let's go ahead and move these items out of the way. Now that we disassembled the Dreamcast, what we can do is we can take all the plastic pieces and then place them in some warm and soapy water and just let it sit there for a second, and that way that soap and the warm water can break down some of that dirt and some of that grime. And once you leave it there for a few minutes, you can go in with the soft part of a sponge or with a toothbrush, whatever it is that you need, and start scrubbing at all the plastic pieces. What I like to do personally is I like to leave them out and let them air dry, but some people have recommended that you can use like a keyboard duster or something that blows warm, nothing hot, no hot air please, but anything that's warm or cold air, and just air dry them, so that way you go through the process a little bit faster. But personally for me, I like to air dry them because this is typically where I take a break from the whole process and go eat dinner, go eat lunch, and then I'll come back and everything should be ready to go, so we can go ahead and complete the process. So it's up to you which way you want to go. I'm just trying to give you some good recommendations here. I'm going to start with the broadband adapter and clean it with a toothbrush and isopropyl alcohol. Make sure it's nice and clean. Next, I'll work on the controller port structure here and make sure it's nice and clean as well. Next, I'm going to clean the fan with a Q-tip and isopropyl alcohol, and I cleaned all the blades individually with this Q-tip and then cleaned the rest of the plastic. The CD structure here, I'm going to go ahead and clean the laser with a Q-tip and isopropyl alcohol. Make sure you're nice and gentle on it. Once that is clean, we can go ahead and clean the rest of it with a toothbrush. Once that's done, I'm going to start working on the power supply here and clean the bottom only. I don't recommend touching the top. I use a brush instead. You can get a paintbrush like I did here, and it actually gets to all the little tiny crevices really well. This is actually a tool I just started using and I absolutely love it. I highly recommend it. There's so much debris that comes out of it, as you can see at the bottom of the screen there. And once I'm done with it, I didn't use anything like isopropyl alcohol, just the brush itself was enough. So with this new method, I'm going to take the paintbrush and clean everything else on this actual motherboard here. I'm going to clean the top and the bottom as well before I actually go with the isopropyl alcohol. I did learn from previous mistakes that if I clean just straight toothbrush and isopropyl alcohol, you're just spreading a lot of that dust, and it creates kind of like this weird like white residue on the motherboard, which I don't really like. So I do recommend using some kind of paintbrush or something that's dry that you can clean all the circuits and get in between everything before you clean it with the toothbrush and isopropyl alcohol. Before I start the reassembly, I know a lot of you are going to be asking yourselves is, hey, should I replace the thermal pads the same way this tutorial is advising me to? And the answer is it completely depends. Remember, I did replace the thermal pads for the Nintendo 64, for the PlayStation 2, for the GameCube, and now the Dreamcast, which all contain 6 watts per meter Kelvin thermal pads, which is great. They were cost effective and they worked really, really well for the time. However, I am replacing all the thermal pads for all my systems with 13 watts per meter Kelvin, which are more efficient and work a lot better. And they're a lot softer as well, so they're meant to last a little bit longer. Now, what I mean by softer is you can go ahead and open up these systems and you can see how hard the old thermal pads are. If they are rock hard, yes, I recommend replacing them. However, if they're still kind of squishy or still kind of like a malleable in a sense, I don't recommend replacing them 100%. That's where I go towards the, hey, this is completely optional side of things. It's completely up to you if they're still squishy. So it's up to you which way you want to go. I'll be replacing my thermal pads for all my systems just so I don't have to worry about that again in the future. So again, hopefully that answers any questions about thermal pads. If you guys have any questions at all about them, please let me know. Again, I will list the ones that I'm using for my systems in the description below. Before we get started finally with the final portion of this video, I will let you know that the bottom portion of the Dreamcast thermal pads should be 1mm and the top one for the larger chips should be 1.5 millimeters. Let's continue. Putting the system back together, I'm going to start with the bottom shell and I'm going to put the metal shielding back into place here, make sure everything's aligned. As you can see, I still have the old thermal pads on here, so I'm going to go ahead and take those off. And we're going to go ahead and replace them with the 2 new ones we just cut up. Again, these are the 1mm ones here. Remove any pieces of plastic from either side of the thermal pads. Mine came with plastic on one side and this little blue pad on the other side. Now that we remove those, we can go ahead and place the motherboard back into place. Make sure everything is lined up and all the screw holes are visible so you can put everything back together. With a pair of tweezers, I'm going to remove the old thermal pads on the top side of the motherboard. As you can see, they're still very malleable, still very squishy. So this is completely optional. If yours are the same way, you don't actually have to replace the thermal pads. It's just the way I like to do things is to go ahead and replace them with more efficient ones. With a Q-tip and isopropyl alcohol, I'm going to clean up the old thermal pad residue from the 2 chips. Then I'll take a microfiber cloth and I'm going to remove any residue or any kind of dust on these chips before we place the new thermal pads on them. So here's one thermal pad for the smaller chip here. And then here is the larger one. Again, I went ahead and sized them according to how big the chips are, maybe just a little bit smaller, because once you put the metal shielding on top, it should squish them a little bit and make them spread. So make sure it's a little bit smaller than the chip that they're on. Don't make it exactly the same size. Once they're in place, I'm going to remove the padding that came with my thermal pads. And with that done, I'm going to put the top metal shielding back into the system here. This is a very easy system to disassemble and reassemble. Remember, there were 7 screws that we took off earlier. Make sure you replace all 7 of them. Next up, we're going to do the controller structure that came with the battery and everything. Remember, it does have a ribbon that we have to connect first, so make sure you start with that. Once the ribbon is connected, we can go ahead and align the controller ports with the ABCD plastic. And once everything's lined up, we can go ahead and put the 4 screws that we took off earlier. Remember, there's a fan that is connected to this controller structure as well. So I'm going to go ahead and connect the fan and put it back into place. 2 screws were holding this fan down. Should be 2 smaller screws. Next, I'm going to put the CD structure back into place. Just make sure everything is lined up. Luckily, everything is nice and clean with this. So let's go ahead and put it into place and then place the 3 screws that we've removed from the CD structure. The power button is the next thing I'm going to work on. There were 2 screws, one on each side, holding it into place. And once we put both screws into place, we're going to go ahead and route this wire along the side of the shell, as you can see here. Once that's done, we're going to go ahead and place this piece of plastic that basically protects the rest of the system from overheating due to the power supply. Once that's in place, we can place the power supply. I like to align the back part with the plastic and also align the 6 fork prongs that stick out from the actual motherboard into the power supply. So be gentle with it, but it should align pretty easily, as you can see there. And finally, we can go ahead and hook it up. Finishing off, the last part of this bottom part of the system is going to be 2 screws that holds the power supply together. Once we're done with that, we can go ahead and put this aside because we're going to start working on the top shell here. We're going to start by placing the lid back into the top shell. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and add the power button and the open button back into place as well. Once those are snapped into place, we can flip the whole thing over. I'm going to press down on this little spongy area just to make sure the adhesive is still good. Looks like it is, so we're going to leave it as is. We're going to take this plastic piece here and we're going to place it on the right side and make sure the little knob on the left part of the plastic piece matches with the door to help it open and close. And once it's snapped into place, we can go ahead and screw it down. We're going to take this black piece with the gear and put the spring back into place. I'm going to start by putting the spring leg back into the door area where we found it originally. It can be a little bit finicky, a little bit tricky, but once you get it, you should be good. And make sure you press down and keep applying pressure on this piece until you screw it back down. There were originally 2 screws on this black piece. But this plastic piece here, I'm going to put it back into place. This is for the open door button. I'm going to give it a little test to make sure that it works. And we're going to take the 2 screws that had the washers and we're going to put those back into place real quick. Once that's done, we're going to take this spring here and put this back into place. You don't have to pull too hard, but once it's there, it should be locked and loaded. I'm going to give it a quick test by flipping this over and pressing the open button. Looks like it opens and it latches closed. Finally, we're going to take this plastic piece for the light. Remember, there were 2 screws holding this together. So we're going to grab those 2 screws and we're going to screw this plastic piece back into place. The top shell's not too bad once you get it all figured out, but that was pretty easy to do. It is now complete. So now we can take the network adapter, the broadband adapter, I'm sorry. I'm gonna take the piece of plastic and the first part of the metal shielding here. And finally, we'll take the board. And usually I'll start with the actual broadband port and then place the rest of the piece back into place. The other metal shielding, we're just gonna go ahead and snap it back into the plastic. Make sure that the port is fed through the hole on this part of the metal shielding. Remember that there were 2 screws that was holding this together, so make sure you screw those back into place as well. So all the pieces are officially done. We can go ahead and remove this and then grab the bottom portion of the Dreamcast that we were working on. And then take the top shell and place it on top. Once you place the top shell, we can go ahead and flip it over gently. And we're going to take the 4 screws that we took off earlier that held the whole thing together and put them back into place. With that complete, the final piece is the broadband adapter. Once you snap it back into place, we can go ahead and flip it over and the system is now complete. We're going to give it a quick test here for the open button and give it one quick wipe. Good Dreamcast. I am so ready to tear into this system and play all the games that I wasn't able to play growing up because, as I said earlier, I didn't grow up with the Dreamcast, but I know that it does have arcade perfect ports of Marvel vs. Capcom, Marvel vs. Capcom 2, Street Fighter 3, Third Strikes, and the other iterations, Second Impact, First Generation. But there's also some ports on there that I'm really excited to play, including Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 and Dino Crisis. Another version of Resident Evil that I've never played before, which I finally get to play, is going to be Resident Evil Code Veronica, and there's also exclusives on this system that I've been dying to play, such as Shenmue. So again, this is just a system that I feel was underrepresented or just overshadowed by the release of the generation of the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and the GameCube. But this is a gem and a fan favorite. I know there's a lot of Sega fans out there that are just like just crazy about the Dreamcast, and I can see why. It's a great system. I really enjoyed disassembling, reassembling, and what I've played so far has been a ton of fun. So if this is your kind of thing where somebody goes through and cleans up systems, repairs them if need be, and sometimes mods them, make sure you just hit the subscribe button. That way you're notified every time I post a video. As I stated earlier in my intro, I do have a plan for future videos coming up, including modding this system and doing the finishing touches. So make sure you subscribe and tune in for some more. Thank you guys for joining me, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.